Welcome back, everybody. Today we'll be discussing specific enemy combats. I've tested tons of strategies and techniques in my time with this game, and what I'll share today should help make fights much simpler. The video will progress from basic enemies like groups of Bokoblins to Lynels and beyond. So if you're a newer player and you don't want to have certain enemies spoiled, then you can safely watch up to the end of the Lynel section and then close the video. Let's start with a couple of basic enemies that can annoy you and super simple tips for dispatching them. Recall has a high chance of instantly killing Octoroks when you return their projectiles to them and drop the projectiles on their heads, even if they've returned underground. If instant kills are your thing, then you can wipe out common stall enemies, not the Stalnoxes, with a single Dazzle Fruit. Now for Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. I won't be able to cover every practical strategy, but I want to share a few tips for the silver variants and for groups of enemies. If you struggle with groups of enemies, start experimenting with the different status effects in the game, and consider carrying different weapons specifically for disabling enemies. For status effects alone, you can utilize items with fire, electricity, or ice, muddle buds, dazzle fruit, and puff shrooms. That's not to mention other useful items like springs, rockets, and mushrooms. An ice rod or a boomerang with an ice attachment will incapacitate enemies for the longest duration, so that might be your safest bet. You can try fusing a shock emitter to that boomerang or to a greatsword, and that will also provide decent protection and disarm enemies of their metal weapons. Maybe you're not as confident in swinging your weapon, so you can fuse elemental gems to your shield and let the enemies come to you. Shields can do far more than simply block an enemy's attacks. If you still feel overwhelmed, try tossing a dazzle fruit or a puff shroom. Speaking of puff shrooms, they play a key part in my new favorite way for taking out silver enemies. These can be pretty annoying enemies with their high HP, right? Maybe that's not the greatest concern to you if you're using overpowered weapons, but I like to save those weapons for stronger enemies. This strategy requires an 8-fold blade, a weapon that doubles the damage of your sneak strikes. This weapon drops from the skinny Yiga enemy, but not during regular ambushes. Those Yiga members only drop duplex bows. If you want a guaranteed 8-fold blade, check out locations like the Akala Ancient Tech Lab or what was the Old Man's Hut in Breath of the Wild on the Great Plateau. Next, just fuse something like a silver Lizalfos horn to your weapon and you're ready to go. Don't worry, this one horn will net you many, many more. To make this strategy foolproof, use puff shrooms to sneak up on enemies. It doesn't even matter if they're already engaged in combat with you. The puff shroom will obfuscate them and give you enough time to sneak strike a handful of enemies, provided they're caught within the cloud. I have a couple of things to say about the cloud specifically. First, its blind effect extends slightly beyond the smoky visuals. Second, the enemies will still be blinded for a moment after the smoke dissipates, so don't rush just because you see the smoke starting to clear. If you want to take this strategy to the next level, fuse a puff shroom to a forest dweller weapon to extract multiple uses from it. You're guaranteed to find a forest dweller sword every blood moon cycle atop the Great Deku Tree. Just be warned that when you draw your puff shroom sword from your inventory, it begins on cooldown. You have to wait a second or two to be able to use it. Also, consider equipping something for an attack buff. Even level 1's 20% damage increase will be just enough to one-hit kill a silver Lizalfos with a weapon in the high 40s attack range. Without the damage increase, you'll require more than the single sneak strike, even with a 50 attack weapon. So, there you go. With guaranteed 8-fold blades and a guaranteed forest dweller sword, cleaning up silver enemies will be quick and easy. What about silver boss Bokoblins, or any boss Bokoblin for that matter? They're really just big Bokoblins. All of the previously mentioned strategies are effective against them, including afflicting them with debilitating status effects and using powerful sneak strikes. Next, we'll discuss Hinoxes and Stalnoxes. Both enemies are pushovers. Early on, you may struggle a bit with your damage dealt, but just be patient. Use your bow or a dazzle fruit to drop the enemy to the ground, get a few good hits in the case of a Hinox where it isn't protected by armor, and back away before it can attack you. The easiest opportunity for shooting it in the eye will be when it's chasing you, but you can use homing arrows if you're having any difficulties. Against a Stalnox, you can shoot its eye with a bomb arrow at any time to pop its eye out and deal some good damage. It's not necessary though, so if you'd rather whack away at its legs, go ahead. Whenever you do get to attack the eye on the ground, especially for that killing blow, try to position yourself between it and the main body. Next up are Taluses. These are always fun fights. You've got so many tools at your disposal, so how you engage them really comes down to personal preference. You can recall their projectiles and climb up on their downed bodies, or nimbly evade them and ascend through their bodies. Yes, you can ascend through the chest area of a Talus, or ascend through their platforms in the case of battle Taluses. If you're a skilled sniper, the entire battle can even be fought with your bow and arrows. One tip that some of you already know is that their ore deposits take extra damage from hammer-type weapons. Those weapons include fusions with Moblin horns or Flux Construct parts. My one big tip is in the case of Taluses with ore deposits located on their behinds. I call them butt Taluses. You can kill them from the ground with a spear. You do not need to climb them. Your spear has enough reach to aim upwards while locked on. Now for a few more mini-bosses before getting to Lynels. First is the Flux Construct. I don't think much needs to be said here. Like Taluses, these are fun battles where you get to use multiple abilities. If, for whatever reason, you're not a fan of the conventional ways of fighting them, then you can use bomb arrows. You don't have to aim directly at their weak point. The explosion will penetrate their regular body parts and will impact their weak point, allowing you to avoid some of the hassle of using Ultra Hand or Recall. The next mini-boss is the Froxes, located in the depths. Who else thought that this was a big dodongo when they first saw it? Just keep your cool versus these enemies. Even if you get caught a bit too close to them while they begin to inhale, react by throwing a bomb into their mouths rather than trying to run away. You should only need to do this once per battle. Once you've successfully mounted them and are whacking away at their zonite deposits, remember to use hammers, stay up there, preferably along the creature's spine. Do not dismount just because it wakes up. The Frox should safely fling you up in the air, and you can use this opportunity to glide towards its head with your paraglider and snipe its eye in bullet time. This will knock it out again, and you can rinse and repeat these mounted tactics until you've defeated it. The last mini-boss for now is the Molduga. This desert crawler may seem tough at first, but it should only take 2 or 3 cycles to defeat it. I don't have any particular way of luring it in. I just draw its attention, then sprint perpendicular to its trajectory towards me. Fire a bomb arrow at the body while it's coming back down, and that will knock it onto its side. From there, hit the exposed belly for some bonus damage. Once the Molduga's been disturbed, it will rage through the sand only partially submerged. You can hit it with a bomb arrow at any time when it's like this, and then return to attacking it with your melee weapons. Time for the most eagerly awaited enemy, the Lynel. This is one of the most fearsome enemies in the game for a good reason. It virtually has no weaknesses. It's just hacking and slashing and a test of your reflexes. So, how can you make it any easier? Let's start off with what does not work. You can't impair it with elemental status effects. Even though it's affected by other items, they're not particularly useful. Muddle Buds, they don't help in a one-on-one encounter except to dissuade the Lynel from shooting at you, but I don't recommend getting into a ranged battle. Puff Shrooms work to some degree, but Lynels tend to run out of the smoke cloud. Dazzle Fruit are unfortunately useless here. I experimented with all kinds of shields, and the most useful to me seems to be the Spring Shield. Lynels have a combo attack with 3 swings, and if your shield breaks during one of the first 2 swings, you'll be vulnerable for the subsequent swings. The Spring Shield will at least interrupt the Lynels combo. I recommend your best shields versus Lynels so that yours won't break at an inopportune time. What about different damage types? Well, nothing matters as far as types go. You simply want to maximize your damage to make these fights as quick as possible, so don't hesitate to use the stronger weapons that you've been saving. If you opt for a 2-handed weapon, remember that you can switch to your shield while locking onto the enemy by pressing the B button. Try to always have your shield out and to be facing the Lynel. You can still flurry rush if your 2-handed weapon is sheathed. I'm sure that there are videos out there showing you how to trivialize combat with obscenely strong weapons, but I'll just mention a few weapon ideas and explain basic attack buffs. For your weapons, consider the Zonai, Zora, and Gerudo armaments. Zonai parts fused to Zonai weapons provide additional damage. Mighty Zonai weapons benefit from a 10 damage boost. Thanks to Guru Meditation Error for pointing this out and getting me to look into this in more detail. Zora weapons deal double damage when wet. You don't have to wait for it to rain to use these, but other methods of getting wet can be cumbersome or impractical. Finally, Gerudo weapons will double the attack of whatever item is fused to them. The base weapon's attack will remain unchanged. Now to briefly cover the buffs. If the attack up buff works like it did in Breath of the Wild, and I'm assuming it does, then level 1 is a 20% gain, level 2 is 30%, and level 3 is 50%. You cannot exceed level 3 by combining both clothing and food buffs, but you can combine different types of attack modifiers, like level 3 attack up from your clothing, plus the hot weather attack buff from your food. Alright, why did I have to spend so long detailing how to deal more damage in this game? Because these are long fights and there isn't much in the way of tricks when fighting Lynels. Any damage increase that you can get will go a long way to shortening the durations of these battles. Let's finally talk strategy. One strategy involves stunning and mounting the Lynel repeatedly. Use bullet time to be able to carefully aim at the Lynel's face with your bow. Hitting it there will stun it and allow you to mount it. From the mounted position, just mash your attack button until you're bucked off. Mounting the Lynel instead of flurry rushing has the added benefit of not consuming weapon durability, so there are some interesting things that you can do with that. As for activating bullet time to facilitate this strategy, Person Guy 4864, nice name, mentioned performing a shield surf jump with a Zonai wing fused to your shield for increased jump height. You can activate bullet time at the apex of your jump. I tried this repeatedly, but could only activate bullet time by double tapping the trigger to pull my bow, so maybe I was doing something wrong. If that's too tricky for you, you can drop a hover stone from your inventory and backflip off that, or use the aforementioned spring shield. I personally prefer facing the Lynel with swordplay and by using flurry rushes. They're relatively easy to activate and you'll be pretty safe with your shield out. Unfortunately, shield parrying isn't as useful for creating attacking opportunities. It's really only good for looking cool. I promise you, dodging a Lynel's attacks isn't as hard as it might seem. Use backflips to dodge its swings, and use a side hop to dodge its charge. All of these dodging attempts can be made while keeping your shield held up, which is why I said that it was pretty safe. Again, just make sure to have a durable shield for the Lynel's combo swings. The Flurry Rush activation window seems fairly wide, but my advice for it would be to try to dodge sooner rather than later. Tears of the Kingdom obviously isn't the hardest action game ever made. You'll get a good enough sense for the timing after a couple Lynel fights, and if you want to, save before your combat, and go into it with the intention of practicing certain things rather than trying to beat it. Focusing on practice and experimentation will help you have a relaxed fight, and you can analyze the enemy's movements more closely. It won't take very much practice for you to build your confidence and to dispel the Lynel's threatening aura. That wraps up the first section of this video. Again, if you're new to the game and would like to keep some enemies a surprise, then now's a good time to close the video. I'm going to continue with Gloomhands, Gleeoks, and the bosses. Gloomhands were another enemy that I spent a ton of time testing against. Sure enough, what people figured out around the game's release still seems to be one of the best methods for fighting them, and that is to simply chuck bombs. You can reduce the number of bombs required by mixing in some ice blasts from an ice rod, or by throwing something like a topaz boomerang, but it's not tremendously helpful. If you're patient and have enough battery power, then you can make a turret using a cannon and a construct head. Just find some place to hang out and let your creation do the killing. I want to emphasize attacks that will deal damage to the whole cluster of hands rather than just one or two at a time. If you only manage to kill them periodically, or can't kill them all within a certain amount of time, then they'll begin to respawn. Once you do finally kill them all, you'll be faced with our next enemy, Phantom Ganon. Again, this is another enemy that I battled over and over, hoping to exploit some hidden weakness. There isn't one, at least not that I know of. But it will be reassuring to know that Phantom Ganon doesn't seem to scale with you the same way that other enemies in the game do. I apologize in advance if I'm wrong, but the Phantom Ganons that I faced later in the game were significantly easier than the ones that I faced early in the game. Simply being equipped with stronger weapons, maybe having a bit of armor, and executing a few flurry rushes will make short work of these fights. Like with Lynels, you're better off backflipping or side hopping early against Ganon's attacks. At least if you don't activate the flurry rush, you should be out of harm's way. You can experiment with different camera angles to try to identify cues for his attacks, but there was no universal solution in my testing. Next we have Gleeoks. These were awe-inspiring and so intimidating when I first saw them, and I didn't dare challenge one until I was at least halfway through the game. Now that I've found all variants a couple of times, they're really not too bad. Every fight will be different depending on the terrain. For example, the Colosseum's Thunder Gleeok should be an easier fight compared to Pharaon's Thunder Gleeok because of the available columns to hide behind. The most difficult part of these battles is not getting hit by their lasers first, right? My solution to that is summoning a spring or 2 hoverstones. You can crouch behind them at the last second and be fully protected as long as the Gleeok is grounded. Make sure you can knock out its heads, preferably using homing arrows, during the break from its lasers. Then you can rush in with your melee weapon. Your Zonai shelter should last for a couple of these sequences, but it won't last indefinitely. Also, if you don't knock out all 3 heads, the beast will take flight, and it will probably be able to fire over your shelter. But don't worry, a flying Gleeok isn't the end of the world. You can face it with a durable shield raised, and you ought to be able to tank the full duration of its lasers. Then, return fire with your arrows, and try to nail those remaining heads. If Gleeoks use their Fireball, Ice Ball, or Thunderball attacks, just run. Trying to tank these blasts with your shield will only result in you being burned, frozen, or electrocuted. You can still attempt a bullet time maneuver, but missing it here would be more costly. Consider getting airborne with bomb shields or spring shields, ascending wherever possible, or simply hiding. When the Gleeok finally decides to take to the skies in Phase 2, you'll have just a few moments where your arrows can still reach it. If you can shoot it from the ground, great. If you have a rocket shield, now's the time to try to use it. Otherwise, if it does get up to the sky, it shouldn't really pose a problem for you. The only time that a Gleeok is a serious threat in the sky is with our next enemy. King Gleeok, yes, the most formidable foe in the game. He's just as much of a damage sponge as those silver Lynels, but he can be so much more annoying to fight. So far, everything that I've said for the regular Gleeoks applies here. The shelter strategy, using homing arrows, etc. Just make sure to equip your best stuff. You should be able to identify tall spires of Skyrock on King Gleeok's battlegrounds. I recommend hugging one of these for the first phase, and constantly cycling between ascending through it and jumping off of it for bullet time. If you sprint away as soon as the beast lifts its heads after one of your assaults, then you should be able to make it back to your spire safely. If you're quick with your cycles, then you should be able to enter Phase 2 without ever being truly threatened. Phase 2 is where things actually get tricky. You've probably noticed that none of my strategies have included Sage abilities or resorting to auto-build. Well, I tried flying on the updrafts and hitching rides on the recalled icicles, but I only made it up to King Gleeok safely a single time in at least 10 attempts. I have to think that the single time was also just pure luck. I kept my eyes out for more icicles and incoming thunder, but I could not dodge everything. If you have Sidon's shield or the Thunder Helm, which is obtained through one of the Yiga quest lines, use them here. Do note that you do not have to make it all the way up to King Gleeok. You really just have to get close enough for your homing arrows to reach him. By the way, if you need more eyeballs, when you enter a cave and you see a swarm of geese flying out, shoot the swarm with a bomb arrow. That alone should net you half a dozen eyeballs or more. Now we can move on to the bosses. I'll be pretty brief in this section since most of the fights are relatively easy compared to some of the aforementioned encounters. First, we have Colgera. I killed this boss in the sky with ease, and only struggled a bit in the depths when I had to locate it a couple of times. My strategy was the same in both fights. Maintain altitude below the beast, and aim up to shoot its crystalline body. Marbled Goma is also incredibly simple. Her bomb rocks are more for show than anything since you can move them with Ultra Hand or Recall. Recalling them is how you'll stun her if you're not using Unobo, but he probably makes the fight faster. You can use a bow as much or as little as you want. If you're feeling saucy, you can even run under her and ascend through her body. Next up is the Muktarok. This is the most annoying enemy in the game, hands down. Sidon's ability was great in the temple fight, but I wanted to pull my hair out when I fought without him in the depths. I tried getting creative with opal boomerangs and all kinds of wacky fusions, but nothing worked very effectively because of cooldowns and the speed at which the Muktarok would swim around. Since then, I've bolstered my battery meter, and I believe that using a hydrant fused to a greatsword would simplify the second phase. Try using that plus a healthy dose of bullet time to rain down arrows. Finally, we'll end the video with Queen Gibdo. This was actually fairly difficult in the Thunder Temple. I kept on getting caught by her gust attacks because I didn't keep a far enough distance from her. If you maintain your distance, you should always be able to sprint to the side when she uses her ranged attacks. I watched my buddy fight her in the depths, and all I would comment on is not to waste too much time with the armies of Gibdos and Gibdomoths. You can't destroy the spawners if you don't use Reju, so keep your feet moving, keep tipping your arrows with elemental items, and get in close with a greatsword when the big boss is down. I'm surprised that this is the first time that I've mentioned it, but I'm fairly sure that your highest damage per second possible will be with your strongest two-handed sword and by holding down its power attack. Just keep on spinning. So, that brings us to the end of my longest tips video yet. Congratulations to anyone who endured the whole thing. I feel like I have to apologize for not breaking Lynels and a couple of other enemies the way that I'd hoped, but it is what it is. None of these combats should be particularly difficult after sufficient practice. Don't hesitate to use your strongest weapons on the strongest enemies. Don't feel like you have to do what I did and turn off your sages or not power yourself up. I only did that to prevent spoilers for beginners and for the purpose of experimenting. Now that I'm done with this tip series, you can bet that I'll make use of everything at my disposal to simplify these combats even further. As always, if you have any of your own tips or if you noticed any mistakes in my video, don't hesitate to leave a comment. It's incredible how even after 50, 100, and now 200 hours spent playing this game, some of you are still teaching me new things. Also, if anyone feels like I glossed over any enemies too quickly or that something wasn't clear, just ask me to clarify it for you. Thank you to everyone for watching, bye for now, and see you in the next video.